Welcome back. At the top of the program, we looked at all the latest developments on the impeachment front, and as usual, there are a whole lot of them. Now, in this segment, I'm going to speak with one of the 17 Watergate prosecutors who recently penned a piece in the Washington Post saying that Trump ought to be impeached. Joining us tonight, Nick Akerman, former Watergate prosecutor and also former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. As always, Nick, thank you. Let me just jump into the question that I've been getting a lot of.
Sure.
Given the folks that did not testify, that are looking for clarity, do we listen to the president or do we listen to basically the House and the subpoenas that have come through them? When are we going to get clarity as to who shall decide? Who is, in effect, have basically testimony that is privileged, and who basically has to respond to a subpoena that comes from Schiff or whomever saying, tell us your story?
Well, they're all supposed to respond to the subpoenas. I don't see any of this being privileged. It certainly fits within the exception to the privilege being conversations in furtherance of a criminal act. So there's no way any of this is privileged. And the bottom line is the panel will use all of this to raise the adverse inference that if any of these people were to testify, that their testimony would be incriminating as to Donald Trump.
To that end, in addition to this inquiry, you have various suits looking at the emoluments, possible violations by the president. We saw what happened today as it relates to a court struck down the objections for Trump to release the tax returns. The White House has said, well, basically, we're going to appeal this all the way up to the Supreme Court. Explain the significance of the dates, which is if this doesn't get on the docket, if the Supreme Court chooses to hear this for the January session, we won't get the answers in spring, and obviously we have the clock of November of next year. They're intentionally trying to slow play this. Could it actually work for them?
Pretty much no. Because if you're looking at the narrow issue of what Trump did with Ukraine, they've got the evidence. They've got people who've come in and testified. They've got the conversation, at least in a partial transcript, and we even have somebody who's testified that the ellipses in that conversation have incriminating statements within them. So I think there's going to be sufficient evidence on Ukraine. As to the other evidence, for example, the court opinion that came down from the Second Circuit today with respect to, this is the district attorney's office in New York, being able to get tax returns from Trump's tax preparers. The odds of the Supreme Court taking that particular case, I'd say, are about 0 to none. It's a very narrow issue. It has to do with a subpoena on a third party that is unrelated to making the president do anything. And the odds are that the Supreme Court will turn down any appeal or any stay, and that material will have to be turned over. You've got other court actions in place, such as the one in the District of Columbia with respect to the redacted Mueller information that the district court has ordered to be produced to the House committee. There is a stay now with the Court of Appeals, but I think that will disappear relatively quickly. And again, it seems to me the issue there is a narrow issue relating to grand jury material. Unlikely that the Supreme Court is going to take that. So some of these things are going to be pretty quick at this point. But again, in terms of the actual impeachment inquiry that's at issue here, the main item is Ukraine. And on Ukraine, the House pretty much has a complete picture, and we'll see just how complete that picture is once the open public hearings start.
To that end, though, Nick, you need 20 Republicans to, at the end of the day, say, I'm going to be able to go back home and convince my constituents that I needed to vote for impeachment here because there was a high crime and a misdemeanor, period. The president, I think, I don't know about effectively, but it certainly entered into the argument about redefining what the executive branch can do. And simply put, I couldn't believe this, but his attorneys basically said, hey, listen, the president could go on Fifth Avenue right now and shoot somebody, and there's nothing anyone can do about it because he is above any form of prosecution, being that he's the executive branch. Any kind of exposure that he'd have would have to wait till after he leaves office. Whether that's irrational or not, that's the standard they're presenting right now. Do we need to have clarity to the American public, a little civics about checks and balances, that they're supposed to be co-equal branches of the government, and no president can't play Dirty Harry on Fifth Avenue, and that's okay? Don't we kind of need to explain and codify where the line starts and stops?
I don't think we have to. We have a system of checks and balances, and if Congress believes, as I think it will, that they have been stonewalled by the White House, that certain evidence hasn't been produced, one, they're going to take the adverse inference that all of this testimony would be incriminating, and two, they'll probably make that a separate article of impeachment, just as they did with Richard Nixon for refusing to cooperate with the impeachment process. So I think at the end of the day, Congress is going to have the upper hand. Now, you point out that you still need 20 senators, but it's not so much the 20 senators having to justify to their constituents. It's a question of whether or not the House can bring around those constituents through these public hearings so that people understand that what was done here wasn't just a high crime and a misdemeanor, but it was also bribery under the U.S. Constitution. It was also a violation of the Hobbs Act for extortion, which is a criminal offense. What the House has to do now, just as Congress did with respect to the Watergate matter, is educate the public on what the evidence is and why it's so important that these facts justify an impeachment. If you cannot impeach a president for using the levers of government to basically get a foreign power to investigate your prime political opponent, I don't know what would be impeachable, and that would just turn our entire democracy on its head.
Finally, Nick, you're making the case to the American public. You're the lead prosecutor in this hypothetical, and I see there's two different lanes you could go down. You could stick to Ukraine and say, my gosh, this is clear as can be. Our tax dollars, $400 million. He basically extorted him to say, I need you to get in front of a camera and say you're looking into the dirty Bidens here, and I'll protect you from Russia right over the border. Or you can say, this is not some one-off call that he didn't get right. Let's look at what he's done. The guy's lined his pockets here at every opportunity he can using the office of the presidency. Look at the returns. He's obviously got some shady stuff here, some conflicts of interest, and that's been playing out for the 3 years since he's been president. And by the way, let's look at the Mueller probe, by the way, and some of the transcripts. There's a pattern here. He did it with the Russian emails, and he did it again with this. He's never learned his lesson. He's abusing the office of the presidency. Do you want to keep it down a narrow single lane here, or are you going to try and create a pattern to say he's shameless, he's done it before, he's doing it now, he'll do it again?
Well, I think you have to be careful here because you really want evidence that is compelling. The Ukrainian evidence is compelling. Donald Trump was caught with his hand in the cookie jar. There's no question that he asked the Ukrainian president to investigate the Bidens and that he held out the fact of the money that was appropriated by Congress, not producing that unless and until the Ukrainian president initiated that investigation by making a public statement about it, also not offering to let the Ukrainian president come to the White House. And I think when people understand the national security impact of what this president has done, and why he's done it for his own personal gain and political gain, that I just think that when the public understands the simple facts that are here, that matter alone is certainly justifies an impeachment.
We're going to find out, Nick. I appreciate your time tonight, though. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, when we come back, the president, he's hiring someone to help him shore up the evangelical vote. Well, the woman he's hired, she's raised a whole lot of questions, and so is the reason that he hired her in the first place. We'll explain that and more after the break.